What would you do if, after escaping a toxic marriage and finally getting back on your feet, a bully landlord tried to sue you into the ground over something that was his fault? In today's story, the protagonist's response is a masterclass in how to handle it. My first marriage was to a man who was a fantastic father but a horrible husband. For 6 long years, I was belittled, my primary role seemingly to be a baby factory for his heirs. Once he had the family he wanted, his treatment of me grew even worse, until one day I finally woke up and decided to leave. This story isn't about him, but that chapter is important for context. I walked away with almost nothing, just my clothes, a computer, and a car worth maybe $4,000. I had no furniture, no savings, nothing. I crashed with a girlfriend for a couple of weeks until I managed to find a crappy townhouse with some roommates. My first bed there was a free couch that reeked of cat pee. To make ends meet, I juggled 3 to 4 jobs, one of them full-time. There was a point where once a week, I'd have to stay awake for nearly 48 hours straight, just working to survive. Fast forward 1 year, the divorce was final, and my lease on the townhouse was up. Through sheer hard work, I had managed to furnish the home, my bedroom, and a room for my kids for when they visited. I was finally getting my feet on the ground. My landlord, let's call him Mr. Alistair Finch, was a nice-ish guy during my tenancy. I was a good tenant, always paid my rent on time, even though I was the only name on the lease despite having roommates. Finch, however, had a habit of showing up unannounced, using flimsy excuses like plumbing tests just to be around. He'd try to engage me in conversation laced with creepy, sexual undertones that always made me uneasy. When my year-long lease was fulfilled, I was more than ready to leave that place. I found a wonderful house in the mountains nearby and was thrilled to finally afford something better than slum living. The lease stipulated a 1-month notice period. My new house, however, was available in just 3 weeks. I emailed Finch, explaining the situation and telling him I intended to move at the end of the month. I was very clear, if he couldn't find a new tenant in time, I would honor my legal obligation and pay for the next month's rent. Within a week, he replied. He said my offer was very generous, but he had already found a new tenant to move in at the beginning of the next month, so I was off the hook. He even revealed that he had already collected a deposit from them. I felt a wave of relief. Everything was working out. Then, disaster struck. The townhouse came with its own appliances, including a washer and dryer. One afternoon, my roommate put a load of laundry in and went to take a nap. He woke up to a horrifying sight. The washer's fill cycle sensor had malfunctioned, the water never stopped, and there was now an inch of water flooding the kitchen and living room. I got the frantic call as I was leaving work and rushed home. It was bad. Standing water covered the entire main level. I immediately called Finch. By the time he arrived, my roommate, some friends, and I had already removed most of the standing water with shop vacs. Surprisingly, Finch didn't seem too upset. He called an appliance repairman, who quickly identified the issue. Yep, here's the culprit, the repairman said, showing us a dial that would stick on the fill stage instead of clicking over to agitate. He replaced the part and left. The next week was chaos, with me trying to pack while insurance adjusters and workers tore out the carpet and 2 feet of drywall from the lower level. On moving day, Finch let himself in while the movers were there and started filming everything with a camera. I naively assumed it was for his insurance claim. I actually felt bad for him. As the crew loaded the last of my things, I told him, I won't ask for any of my deposit back to help with the costs. In front of my roommate and the movers, he replied, thank you, that's very generous of you. I thought that was the end of it. I was so wrong. 2 weeks later, Finch showed up at my new mountain home. He handed me a thick manila envelope. He was suing me. I was stunned. He was suing me? The envelope contained 18 pages of charges, complete with the photos he'd taken. He was nickel-and-diming me for everything, from a bent Venetian blind that was already there when I moved in, to scuffs on the walls. But it got worse. He wanted me to pay his insurance deductible, and the following month's rent. He claimed the new tenants he'd lined up had backed out because they didn't think the repairs would be done in time. He was also charging me for improvements, new lighting, new faucets, things that were in no way my responsibility. He even tried to blame me for cracks in the living room wall from the building settling. The entire lawsuit was built on the accusation that I was negligent. At that moment, Mr. Finch made a critical error, one born from pure arrogance. He saw a vulnerable single mother he could easily steamroll, completely unaware that he had just poked a bear who was finally learning how to fight back. He probably got away with this predatory behavior with other tenants who were on welfare or didn't know their rights, but I had just fought my way out of a marriage that had destroyed my self-esteem. I had my dignity back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt strong. I was not going to let this man push me around. I had 10 days before the arbitration hearing. I got to work. First, I tracked down the very repairman who had worked on the washer. I got a signed deposition from him stating that the machine was desperately in need of maintenance and that the last time he'd done any work for Finch was almost 5 years prior. I then dug into my rental contract and local tenancy laws, which clearly stated that the landlord is obligated to have all appliances serviced every year. Next, I spoke to other tenants in the complex and learned that this was a pattern. I found 2 former tenants who had been sued by Finch, and they provided sworn statements, explaining they had lost by default because they didn't know what to do and didn't show up to arbitration. I was not going to make that mistake. I compiled a massive rebuttal, addressing every single one of his claims. I included my own photos from the past year, printed all our email correspondence, and convinced my ex-roommate and one of the movers to come as witnesses to our conversation about the deposit. The day of arbitration arrived. In Canada, this isn't a formal courtroom, but a conference room at the courthouse with a judge. I wore my power suit. I was ready. As the plaintiff, Finch went first. He spent over 40 minutes droning on, detailing every supposed infraction. This reveals Mr. Finch's greatest fatal flaw, his belief that bullying was a substitute for facts. He assumed his usual tactics would work, failing to realize the person he was up against had come armed not with fear, but with evidence. When he finished, I calmly hauled out my binder. I handed a copy of my rebuttal to the judge, to Finch, and to anyone else who wanted one. Finch was immediately irate, interrupting me every few seconds. Each time he did, I would pause, look at him, and say sweetly, "I was quiet and polite during your time to present. I hope you grant me the same respect." His face grew redder and redder, especially when I presented the repairman's deposition about the 5-year service gap. I paired it with the section of the Landlord-Tenant Act requiring annual maintenance. I finished my defense by countering that not only did I not owe him a cent, but he owed me my full security deposit back, plus a day's pay for having to miss work for his frivolous lawsuit. The judge made his statement, and I'll remember his words forever. He said he was very impressed with my presentation and that I clearly had a good handle on things. He noted from my photos how clean and well-kept my home was, showing pride in where I lived. The bottom line was a total victory. Not only did I win, but the judge ordered Finch to pay me back over 80% of my deposit, plus interest. Finch's face was a priceless mask of shock. The judge then informed him that the board would be reviewing all his previous filings, and if they found a pattern of harassment, he would be reported to the landlord and tenant board. I walked out of that courthouse feeling on top of the world. As one commenter on my story later said, "I'm so amazed at how you were able to be respectful and lawful and not let this terrible guy take advantage of you. That was my goal, to beat him with professionalism and facts." But I wasn't done. Knowing his history, I printed copies of the judge's final, signed order and distributed one to every single tenant in that complex. I wanted to arm them with the knowledge of his practices so he couldn't bully them too. Then came the matter of the money he now owed me. He ignored my emails. The payment deadline came and went. So, I looked up his home address, a public record for landlords, and paid him a visit. I knew he was home, but he wouldn't answer the door. Then, in a move of pure cowardice, he turned on his house alarm. He yelled through the door, "Get off my property or I will call the police." "Okay," I said. I got off his property and camped out on the public sidewalk in front of his house. I had a fold-up chair, a cooler with drinks and sandwiches, and all my court paperwork. I was prepared to stay there indefinitely. As his neighbors came out to see what the alarm was about, I calmly told them my story, showing them the court order that proved he owed me money. Some people online later said, "You kinda scare me." Maybe I was a little scary at that point, but I was done being a pushover. Finch did call the police. They spoke with him first, while he claimed I was harassing and slandering him. The officers then came to me. I explained I was on public property, wasn't disturbing the peace, and that it isn't slander if it's true, and I had the court-signed documents to prove it. They agreed. After an hour of Finch yelling from his lawn, his wife finally came out, defeated. She handed the cash to the police, who counted it, handed it to me, and had me sign off that the payment was complete. I smiled sweetly, thanked the officers, packed up my chair, and went home. Ultimately, this story shows that with patience and preparation, you can dismantle a bully piece by piece, proving that dignity isn't something that can be taken from you. You just have to be willing to fight for it. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed or been a part of?